At the exact moment, millionaire Langston Rourke reached for his bride's hand, two dirt-smudged 10-year-olds pushed through the hedge and shouted, "Stop the wedding!" Guests froze, cameras turned, and as the boy raised a DNA test above his head, he added, "You're our father, and our mom is dead." The Ashford estate had never looked more extravagant. Golden sunlight spilled over manicured hedges, crystal fountains danced in perfect arcs, and every table was draped in silk as white-gloved waiters moved between guests, holding trays of imported champagne. This was the wedding of Langston Rourke, millionaire hotel magnate, philanthropist, and one of America's most photographed bachelors. Cameras clicked rhythmically as well-dressed guests took their seats before the marble altar nestled under a rose-covered arch. Everything had been orchestrated to perfection, every moment curated like a magazine spread. But no one noticed the two small figures standing just beyond the hedges, their sneakers covered in dust, holding hands like lifelines. Jovi Whitmore's heart thudded in her chest as she clutched the manila envelope tighter against her chest. Her twin brother Cale stood beside her, his other hand holding a crumpled photo of a man standing beside a Rourke International sign. Langston Rourke, their father. They had never met him. They didn't even know his name until 6 months ago, when their mother, Maris Whitmore, grew too weak to keep the secret. She was a quiet, tired woman who spent most of her life wiping down greasy diner counters and coming home with tips in change. She never spoke of their father, never let herself speak badly of him either. But cancer had a way of dragging the past into the light, and in her final months, Maris finally told the twins the truth. "You have a father," she whispered one night, her voice rasping like paper. "I don't know what kind of man he is now, but you deserve to know." She gave them a photo, a name, and begged them to find him, not for her, but for themselves. 2 weeks later, she was gone. The system moved quickly. Orphaned, the twins were sent to live temporarily with a kind but overworked social worker named Avril Huxley. When Jovi showed her the photo and begged for help, Avril hesitated, but something in Jovi's eyes reminded her of her own daughter. She pulled strings, pulled favors, and finally managed to get a discreet DNA test using an old shirt Langston had worn at a charity gala. The results had arrived 2 days ago. Paternity confirmed, 99.99%. Langston Rourke was their father. But the news had come too late to be gentle, because Langston was getting married that very weekend to socialite Brielle Stanton, heiress to a chain of luxury fashion houses. It was to be the wedding of the year, and now 2 10-year-olds were about to walk into it and change everything. Cale turned to Jovi, his voice tight. "What if they don't let us in? What if he doesn't believe us?" Jovi stared at the people laughing and sipping champagne just beyond the hedges. Her throat was dry, her legs shaky, but her eyes were locked on the tall man standing near the altar in a navy suit, buttoning his cufflinks. His face was the same one from the photograph, same sharp jaw, same dark eyes, same ghost of a smile. "He has to believe us," she whispered. "We have the truth. That's all we have." They waited until the music swelled and the officiant cleared his throat to begin the ceremony. The crowd hushed. "If there is anyone here who objects to this union," the man said, his voice echoing across the garden, "speak now or forever hold your peace." The words had barely left his lips when a small voice rang out, clear, young, and trembling. "We do." Every head turned. Gasps rippled across the rows of guests as the children stepped forward, out of the shadows, and into the sunlight. Their clothes were too big, their faces pale, and yet their presence was so commanding that even the photographers hesitated to snap. Langston turned toward the sound and froze. Kyle lifted the envelope with both hands. "You're our dad," he said, "and we can prove it." Silence fell like a dropped chandelier. Brielle's eyes widened. The officiant looked horrified. The guests were already whispering behind hands and phones. But Langston Rourke, Once the unshakable businessman who built an empire could only stare at the two children with a look of stunned disbelief. Everything, the wedding, the wealth, the future he thought he had, hung in the air like glass on the verge of shattering. ChatGPT сказал. For a moment, Langston couldn't speak. The world around him blurred, the murmurs of the crowd, the sharp breaths, the movement of his bride turning toward him in confusion. His focus tunneled down to the two children standing just a few feet away. Their faces so hauntingly familiar, it twisted something deep in his chest. The boy had his chin. The girl, those eyes. His mother's eyes. And his own. He had always believed he had no children. He had never wanted any. But now, two living truths stood before him with shaking hands and tear-wet lashes. Brielle stepped forward, her gown whispering across the stone path. Langston, is this a joke? Tell me this is some sick joke. Who are these street kids? Kael's fists clenched at her words, but Jovi gently touched his shoulder. She looked up at Langston, voice steady but small. We're not lying. Our mom was Maris Whitmore. She worked in a diner outside Tulsa. She never told us your name. Not until she was sick. Not until the end. Langston's heart dropped. Maris, that name struck him like lightning. He hadn't heard it in over a decade, but it hadn't faded. Not completely. They'd met during a stormy business trip years ago. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met. Gentle, sincere, almost painfully honest. He remembered the way she'd laughed over pie and talked about wanting to be a writer before life got in the way. They'd had one night, maybe two, but he'd left in the middle of the third day. No number, no goodbye. He told himself it was cleaner that way, that people like her didn't belong in his world. And now he was staring into the faces of the children he'd left behind without ever knowing. Brielle's voice was shrill now, sharp and panicked. This is ridiculous. You don't know these kids, Langston. They're lying. Someone put them up to this to ruin our day. They have a DNA test, someone in the front row whispered. I heard the boy say it. Langston swallowed hard and stepped off the altar. The crowd parted as he slowly walked toward the twins. He took the envelope from Kyle's trembling hands. Inside, the paper was wrinkled, but the words were unmistakable. Paternity probability, 99.99%. He read it twice, then a third time. His chest tightened as if his lungs were being compressed. He looked up again and studied the boy. Kale. There was a defiance in his eyes, one that reminded Langston of the way he used to glare at investors who underestimated him. And Jovi, quiet but brave, her spine straight despite the fear radiating off her. His children. He couldn't breathe. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't know she was pregnant. Jovi blinked quickly, trying to stay strong. She didn't want to chase you. She said if you didn't want us, she wouldn't force you, but she thought you deserved to know. She tried to tell you, but then she got sick. Langston closed his eyes. Regret burned through him like acid. He had spent years building towers and buying islands, while the woman he once cared about raised their children in silence, waiting tables and dying without even a phone call from him. The twins had lived through things he couldn't imagine, and they still stood here, alone and yet fearless. The minister was whispering to someone. Security began moving toward the children, but Langston raised his hand. Don't touch them. Brielle stormed up to him, her voice cold. You're not seriously believing this? Langston, they're ruining our wedding. He didn't answer. Instead, he knelt on one knee in front of the twins. His voice cracked when he spoke. I know this doesn't make up for anything, but I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I didn't know about you. I swear to you, I didn't know. Cale took a step back, unsure. Are you mad at us? Langston's eyes watered. He shook his head. Number, I'm angry at myself. Silence fell again. Brielle looked between them, her carefully constructed life unraveling in front of strangers and flashing cameras. So what now? You're going to abandon me for these For this circus? Langston rose to his feet slowly and turned to her. I think this was never supposed to happen, Brielle. At least not like this. I can't stand here and pretend I'm the same man I was yesterday. Because I'm not. Not after this. She stared at him, lips trembling. You're choosing them? I'm choosing what's right. And with that, he walked away from the altar, down the aisle, and knelt beside the twins again. The crowd was stunned, silent. A few guests stood, some even clapped, slow, uncertain. No one knew what to say. But Langston didn't care anymore. For the first time in years, he wasn't worried about the headlines or the boardroom. He was just a man meeting his children. And everything was about to change. Langston didn't return to the mansion. Instead, he walked hand in hand with the twins through a quiet side path leading away from the crowd, the echo of stunned murmurs and snapping cameras still lingering in the background. His navy jacket was open now, his perfect silk tie loosened. The children said nothing for several minutes, and neither did he. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was thick, like the air just before a storm. Jovi finally spoke. You don't have to keep us. We didn't want to go into foster care again without trying. Her voice broke on the word again. Langston stopped walking. The gravel beneath his expensive leather shoes crunched. Wait, you've been in foster care? Cale didn't look up. Yeah, since Mom died. They split us up at first, but then Miss Avril made some calls and got us back together. We've been with her since. Langston's jaw tensed. No one had told him. No one had even tried. You've been through that? At 10? Jovi nodded. We've been through worse. That sentence landed like a punch in his chest. He had spent the last decade on private jets, eating caviar, building hotel empires, and vacationing on islands with women whose names he could barely remember. And all the while, his children, his own blood, had been bounced around the system, clinging to each other in a world that had already taken too much. Langston knelt in front of them again, looking them both in the eyes. I didn't know. I would have come for you. I swear I would have. Cale stared back, unmoved. You left our mom. Why would we believe you? The boy's honesty cut deeper than any scandal ever had. Langston lowered his head for a second. Because I'm here now, and I want to make things right. I know I can't undo the years I missed, but I don't want to miss any more. Jovi studied his face. She always said you weren't a bad person, just scared. She said she forgave you a long time ago, even if she never saw you again. Langston's eyes welled. She said that? She did, Jovi whispered, the night before she died. He felt as if the ground had dropped beneath him. A woman he'd walked away from without a word had spent her dying breath defending him, and her children had crossed cities, broken into a stranger's wedding, and risked everything just to find the man she believed he still could be. Langston reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. What's Miss Avril's number? Cale recited it from memory. Langston dialed immediately. The call was brief but emotional. Avril was crying before he even finished explaining who he was. She admitted she hadn't told anyone because she wasn't sure Langston would even care. She didn't want the children hurt again. But Langston made it clear. They were not going back to the system, not even for a night. 20 minutes later, a sleek black SUV arrived outside the estate. Langston opened the door himself. You're coming home with me, he said softly, if that's okay. Cale hesitated. You don't even know us. Langston crouched to their level. Then I guess we have a lot to learn, starting now. They climbed into the car, silent but stunned. Inside, everything smelled like leather and cedar wood, and the seats were softer than anything they had ever touched. Jovi held the DNA results in her lap, gripping it like it might vanish if she let go. As the car pulled away from the wedding that never happened, Langston turned to face them. Do you like ice cream? He asked. Cale blinked. Like the real kind from a store? Langston smiled. From the best shop in the city with toppings. Jovi gave him the smallest smile she could manage. Mom always said, When we finally found you, we should ask for ice cream. Langston stared at her, heart twisting. Then let's honor her wish. As they drove through the city, one man and two lost children trying to find something like family, a new chapter quietly began. It was broken, imperfect, but real. And it was theirs. The ice cream shop was nestled in the heart of the old district. Langston remembered it from his college days, long before wealth and power had swallowed every quiet part of his life. It was the kind of place with chalkboard menus, glass jars of sprinkles, and a worn counter where kids left sticky fingerprints. When the SUV pulled up, the twins' eyes widened as they read the glowing neon sign. Benny's Scoops, since 1965. Langston held the door open for them. Jovi stepped in cautiously, scanning the warm, colorful interior as if afraid it would disappear. Kyle wandered straight to the freezer display, nose nearly pressed against the glass. Langston followed behind slowly, watching every reaction with a kind of awe he hadn't felt in years. The girl behind the counter looked up and blinked. Mr. Rourke? He smiled faintly. Hey, Madison, it's been a while. She looked shocked. I didn't think you still came here. I don't, he said, glancing at the twins. But I should have. 2 sundaes, please. Whatever they want. Kyle's eyes grew wide. Anything? Anything, Langston said, crouching beside him. Go crazy. Kale's hands trembled slightly as he pointed at the fudge swirl. Jovi chose strawberry with rainbow sprinkles. Madison smiled gently as she scooped the orders, her eyes flicking between Langston and the children. She didn't ask questions, but it was obvious she knew something was different. They found a booth in the corner. The leather was cracked and familiar, and for a moment, Langston felt like a younger version of himself, the man who used to dream, not just acquire. He watched the twins eat in silence for a while, then finally asked, Can you tell me about her? About Maris? Jovi set her spoon down gently. She worked nights, always came home tired, but she still read to us, even when she could barely keep her eyes open. Kale added, she made grilled cheese on Sundays, even when we had almost no food, and she'd dance in the kitchen when old songs played. She never complained, Jovi whispered, even when her hands started shaking and she couldn't walk up the stairs anymore. She just smiled and said, We're tougher than the world. Langston felt something clawing at his chest. Guilt, shame, and love. Real, aching love for a woman he hadn't thought about in years, and for 2 children who had survived storms without him. I remember her laugh, he said softly. She laughed once so hard she spilled coffee all over me, and she didn't even apologize. She just handed me a napkin and kept laughing. Jovi smiled at that. She told us that story, said you were the fanciest man she'd ever met, but that your heart was good. She thought you were lonely. Langston's voice cracked. She wasn't wrong. A moment of silence passed, not heavy but deep. Kyle looked up suddenly. Are we going to live in a big house now? Langston exhaled, leaning forward. You're going to live somewhere safe, somewhere that's yours, and I'll be there, if you'll let me. Jovi studied him. We don't want stuff. We just don't want to be forgotten again. Langston swallowed hard. I will never forget you. Not again. I promise. They didn't reply right away, but when Kale reached across the table and slid his half-melted sundae toward Langston, it felt like something had shifted. A door cracking open. A start. After they finished, Langston paid, left a generous tip, and walked them back to the car. The city lights shimmered on the windshield. It was getting late. Jovi rested her head against the window in the back seat, clutching the manila envelope. Kale was already drifting off beside her. Langston sat in the front passenger seat, silently watching them in the rearview mirror, the kind of stillness he hadn't known in years settling over him. Drive slow, he told the chauffeur. Let them sleep a little longer. The man nodded. The SUV rolled forward quietly, carrying 3 broken hearts towards something none of them had expected. Not the end, not yet, but maybe the beginning of something that could be real. Langston stood at the entrance of his penthouse apartment, the kind that overlooked the whole Manhattan skyline, with floor-to-ceiling glass and marble floors polished to a mirror shine. It had once felt like a symbol of his success. Now it felt cavernous, too clean, too cold. As the elevator doors slid open and the twins stepped out behind him, he could already see their hesitation. Jovi clutched the DNA envelope like a security blanket, and Cale's wide eyes flicked across the gilded lighting and towering ceilings as if they'd entered another planet. "This is where you live?" Kyle asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Langston nodded. "For now. But we can find someplace different if you want. Somewhere with a yard, a dog. You get to help decide." The boy didn't answer. Jovi stepped in cautiously, scanning everything. The way her shoulders remained slightly hunched told Langston she was still waiting for something to go wrong, as if at any moment someone might change their minds and send them away. He led them into the main living space, past the fireplace that no one used, and toward the guest rooms down the hallway. "You can each have your own room," he said gently, "or share. Up to you." "Share," Jovi said quickly, before Cale could even open his mouth. Langston paused. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "He has nightmares sometimes." Cale flushed, embarrassed, but didn't argue. Langston opened the door to the larger guest suite and turned on the lights. The room was immaculate. Too immaculate. The kind of perfection designed by decorators and not meant for children. The bed was untouched, the furniture modern and cold. Jovi stared at the abstract painting above the headboard, as if trying to make sense of it. Langston ran a hand over his face. "Right. This won't work." He stepped out into the hallway, called his assistant, and in under 10 minutes, a team was dispatched to bring in something warmer. Color, books, blankets, stuffed animals, anything that would make the room feel human. He wasn't used to this, but he was trying, and it showed. Back in the living room, he brought out drinks, hot cocoa, not wine. He sat down across from them on the rug, not the sofa. "So," he began carefully, "you've told me a lot about your mom. Can I tell you a little about me?" Cale nodded warily. Jovi just watched. "I didn't grow up rich," Langston said. "I was raised by my grandmother. My dad was gone. My mom, she struggled. I built everything from scratch, but I lost people along the way. I was always afraid to stop building. Like if I did, I'd fall apart." Kyle looked at him. "Is that why you left our mom?" Langston didn't flinch at the question this time. He'd been asking himself the same thing since the moment he saw their faces. "I think I was scared, of how real it felt, of how much I cared. I told myself I couldn't afford to be distracted, but it wasn't distraction, it was love, and I walked away from it like a coward." Jovi finally spoke. "She cried once, just once, the day we asked who our dad was. She told us not to hate you." Langston felt his throat tighten again. "She shouldn't have had to do it alone." He stood and went to a side cabinet, pulling out an old wooden box, one he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a faded photograph. Maris was laughing in it, holding a cup of coffee and wearing one of his oversized shirts. Her smile lit up the frame. "She gave this to me," he said, showing them. "I kept it. I just buried it under everything else I thought mattered." Jovi took the photo with reverence. "You look happy." "I was," he said quietly. "I just didn't know what to do with it." There was a pause, heavy but not sharp. Cale glanced at his sister, then at Langston. "Can we call you Dad?" The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through every part of him. He blinked, stunned. "You can, if you want to." Jovi nodded. "We want to." That night, Langston didn't return to his master suite. Instead, he pulled a blanket onto the floor outside their room and stayed there in case they needed him. He didn't sleep much. He listened to the rhythm of their breathing through the door and whispered a silent apology to a woman no longer there. The next morning, before the sun even rose, he made pancakes for the first time in his life. They were burned, uneven, A disaster, really. But when the twins sat down in the kitchen in their oversized borrowed pajamas, they smiled. And for the first time in decades, Langston Rourke felt like a man becoming someone new, someone he hoped his children could be proud of. 2 days later, the press descended like wolves. Langston had known it would happen. He wasn't naive. The wedding fiasco had been caught on camera, and the footage of two dusty children interrupting the ceremony with a DNA envelope had gone viral within hours. News outlets speculated wildly, some with sympathy, others with sharp teeth. Billionaire's secret children crash wedding was on every headline. Paparazzi camped outside his building. Rumors swirled that the children were fakes, that it was all a ploy, that Langston had a breakdown. Brielle's publicist released a carefully crafted statement about her deep heartbreak and betrayal. But none of it mattered to Langston. What mattered now was protecting Jovi and Cale. That morning, he watched from behind a tinted window as reporters shouted their questions at the front of the building. The twins were sitting on the floor of the living room, piecing together a jigsaw puzzle Langston had bought the night before. They had started opening up more. Cale laughed now and then. Jovi let him braid her hair with shaky fingers. But Langston could tell they were still tense. Every knock on the door made Cale flinch. Jovi hadn't let go of the DNA envelope, even when she slept. Langston made a call to his legal team, then another to a child psychologist, and then one to a woman he hadn't spoken to in nearly 8 years, Kala Jensen, a fiercely private PR strategist who used to work with his firm before she quit corporate life in favor of raising her son. She was one of the few people who had ever dared to tell Langston he was wrong to his face. She picked up after one ring. "I saw the footage," she said. "Told you that marriage was a mistake." "I need your help," Langston replied, "but not for me, for them." She was at his penthouse an hour later, dressed in sneakers and a navy blazer, her no-nonsense expression unchanged. She took one look at the twins and softened just slightly. Then she turned to Langston and spoke quietly in the hallway. "You have 2 kids who look like they haven't known peace in years, and now you've thrown them into a media circus. You're going to have to make this right. Fast." "I know," Langston said. "Tell me how." She drafted a statement within minutes, one that confirmed paternity, honored Maris, and asked for privacy. Then she contacted a trusted journalist, someone who'd been fair in the past, and arranged for a single controlled interview to end the chaos. Later that day, Langston sat down with the twins to explain what was coming. He crouched on the rug next to them. "Some people are going to say things that aren't true. They'll take pictures and shout questions. I can stop a lot of it, but not all. So I need you to trust me. We'll get through it together." Jovi stared at him. "Are you embarrassed?" Langston looked stunned. "Number never. Because people online are already saying we're trash, that we ruined your life," she whispered. He felt the rage rise in his throat. "They don't know anything. You didn't ruin anything. You saved me from a life I didn't even realize was broken." Cale looked down. "We just didn't want to go back into the system." Langston reached for their hands. "You won't. Ever." The next morning, the interview aired. Langston sat on a neutral-toned couch in a simple sweater, not a suit. The journalist asked thoughtful questions, and Langston answered them with something the public rarely saw in him: honesty. He spoke of regret, of Maurice, of finding out too late and choosing now to do better. When asked what his hopes were, he glanced at the camera and said, "I want them to know they're not alone anymore. And I want the world to stop treating love like it has to be perfect or planned. Sometimes the greatest things in your life arrive at the most unexpected time, and you fight for them." The clip went viral, not the crash or the scandal, but this. His words, his face, the kids sitting beside him in the end, with Jovi holding his hand and Cale shyly leaning against his side. For the first time, the world didn't see a billionaire scandal. They saw a family trying to become one. In the days that followed, the noise didn't vanish, but it softened. The paparazzi drifted away. Hate turned into curiosity, curiosity into support. Letters arrived at the office, some from strangers, some from people who had known Maris and wanted to share her kindness. Langston read every single one. That evening, as he tucked the twins into their shared bed, now redecorated with warm quilts, posters of constellations, and a nightlight shaped like a fox, Jovi touched his arm. "You didn't have to do the interview," she whispered. Langston kissed her forehead gently. "Yes, I did. For you." Cale yawned. "Can we stay, like forever?" Langston blinked away the sudden sting in his eyes. "Forever sounds perfect to me." And as they drifted off to sleep, he sat in the hallway again. This time, not out of fear they'd vanish, but because he simply didn't want to miss a single moment more. It was late afternoon when Langston received a letter that stopped him cold. He had just returned from a quiet lunch with the twins in Central Park, where they'd fed ducks and laughed until their cheeks were sore. Jovi had brought along a notebook and was scribbling stories like her mother used to, and Cale had picked up a stray soccer ball and joined a group of boys playing under the trees. For the first time since they'd arrived, they looked like children, not survivors. But back at the penthouse, as Langston sorted through the mail with one hand and reached for his phone with the other, he saw the return address, Oklahoma State General Hospital. The handwriting was neat, careful. He recognized it immediately. It was from Maris. Inside the envelope was a folded letter in a small sealed envelope with the twins' names written on the front. The hospital had held it until her passing, as instructed, and mailed it once confirmation of Langston's guardianship had been made public. He sat down slowly, holding the letter like it was made of glass. "Langston, if you're reading this, it means the truth finally found you. I never knew how to reach you, or if you'd care if I did. I didn't want to chase ghosts, but I also couldn't let the kids go through this world not knowing who their father was. So I'm trusting you with something far more precious than I ever trusted anyone. Our children, they're strong, smarter than me, and kinder than this world deserves. But they've been through more than you know. I taught them how to survive. I never got the chance to teach them how to feel safe. That's your job now. Tell Jovi it's okay to put the notebook down sometimes. She doesn't have to carry my dreams. She can chase her own. And tell Cale he doesn't have to be the protector all the time. Let him just be a boy. If you fail them, I will haunt you with every storm that touches your house. But if you love them, if you really show up for them, then maybe you and I were not a mistake after all. Maybe we were just unfinished. I forgave you long ago. Now forgive yourself. With love, Maris." Langston didn't realize he was crying until the ink on the letter began to blur. He pressed the paper to his chest and sat in silence for a long time, letting the weight of her words settle into the hollow places inside him. When he finally stood, he took the second envelope and knocked gently on the twins' bedroom door. They were lying on their stomachs, side by side, reading from an astronomy book Langston had brought home the day before. They looked up when he entered. "I got something," he said softly, holding out the envelope. Jovi took it carefully, reading the names written in their mother's looping script. Her fingers trembled. Cale scooted closer to her shoulder, and they opened it together. Inside were 2 letters, one for each of them, and 2 small charms, a silver star and a bronze feather. Neither child spoke for a long time. They just read. Silently, side by side, then Jovi pressed her letter to her lips and leaned into Langston's side without a word. Cale followed a second later, resting his head on Langston's knee. No one cried aloud, but the room was thick with the aching kind of love that exists when someone is gone, but everything they gave still lingers. Langston wrapped his arms around them both. "She knew you'd find me. She believed you would." "I miss her," Jovi whispered. "I do too," Langston said, his voice breaking. Cale pulled the star charm from his hand. "Can I wear it always?" Langston nodded. "You never have to take it off." Later that evening, Langston made spaghetti, badly, and the twins teased him for putting too much garlic. They ate together at the kitchen counter instead of the dining room. Kyle played music from Langston's phone and danced awkwardly around the kitchen. Jovi taped her charm above her bed, next to her mother's photo. And when night fell, Langston stood on the balcony, watching the city's lights shimmer. The pain of what he'd lost would never fully leave, but something new had taken root, quiet, real, and steady. He had been a man who ran from connection, from truth, from the weight of his own heart. But now he was a father, and love, imperfect, broken, healing love, was the one thing he wouldn't walk away from again. It had been 3 weeks since the wedding that never happened, and Langston could no longer recognize the man he had been before the twins walked into his life. The penthouse no longer echoed with silence. It buzzed with music, laughter, the occasional argument over toothpaste or board games. The cold marble floors now held rugs, mismatched socks, and forgotten books. One wall of the office had been transformed into a photo board. Baby pictures of the twins that Miss Avril had mailed, drawings Jovi pinned with glitter tape, and a printout of the DNA test, kept not as proof, but as a reminder of the miracle that brought them together. This morning, Langston had woken early, not to chase a deal or meet an investor, but to prepare breakfast. He was learning. The pancakes were no longer burnt. The coffee didn't taste like chemicals. He even knew how Cale liked his eggs, scrambled, barely browned. Jovi liked hers over easy, but only if the yolk didn't run. It was ridiculous how proud he felt for knowing these details. The twins came into the kitchen still in their pajamas, sleepy-eyed, but smiling. Kyle had a blanket over his shoulders like a cape. Jovi held her notebook and a pen already in motion. "Big day today," Langston said, setting down their plates. "You remember what we're doing?" Cale nodded, eyes wide. "We're going to the courthouse." Langston smiled. "That's right." Today was the official guardianship hearing. On paper, he already had emergency custody, but this was the final step, the moment it would all become permanent. Legally, forever. It terrified him, not because he had doubts, but because he couldn't imagine losing them now. After breakfast, they dressed carefully. Langston helped Cale fix the buttons on his shirt and braided a soft section of Jovi's hair, the way Maris had in an old photo. When they got into the car, he held both of their hands tighter than he realized. The courthouse hallway smelled of old wood and floor polish. The hearing room was small, quiet, with a judge in wire-rimmed glasses who looked more like a kind librarian than someone who decided children's futures. Miss Avril was there, tears in her eyes before the judge even spoke. She mouthed, "You did it," as Langston took his seat beside the twins. The judge flipped through the file silently, then looked up. "Mr. Rourke, are you prepared to take full responsibility for these children? Physically, emotionally, financially, and with full legal guardianship?" Langston stood. "Yes, sir, I am." He looked to Jovi and Cale. "And do you both want Mr. Rourke to be your permanent guardian?" They nodded in unison. Jovi added softly, "He's our dad." The judge smiled at that. "Then it is the decision of this court that full guardianship is hereby granted to Mr. Langston Rourke, effective immediately." It was done. Cale didn't react at first. Then he blinked hard, looked at Langston, and whispered, "So we're really yours now?" Langston knelt beside him and pulled both children into his arms. "You were always mine. I just didn't know it yet." Outside the courthouse, the air was bright and warm. Paparazzi weren't there. No cameras, no drama. Just the three of them on the steps, a father and his 2 children, starting a life they never expected. They went to Maris's grave next. Langston had arranged for her to be buried in a peaceful place just outside the city, beneath an old cherry blossom tree. Her name was carved into stone with care, beside a quote she had once written in her journal. "Even in the dark, my children will find the light." Jovi placed a small bouquet beside the headstone. Cale left the drawing he had made of their new home, with the three of them inside. Langston stood silently for a long time. "I didn't deserve her forgiveness," he whispered, "but I'll earn yours every day." That night, back at home, Cale crawled into Langston's lap during a movie and fell asleep there. Jovi sat beside him, head on his shoulder, holding her notebook. She had written a new story. The first line read, "Once upon a time, two lost kids walked into a wedding they weren't invited to and found their way home." Langston closed his eyes, holding them both close. It wasn't a perfect family, but it was real. And finally it was whole. This ending carries the emotional depth and catharsis that the entire story builds toward. A conclusion that feels both earned and profoundly moving. What began as a dramatic, almost surreal disruption of a millionaire's wedding turns into something far more powerful. A journey of redemption, healing, and love. Langston Rourke, once a symbol of cold success, transforms into a man of warmth and responsibility, not because he is forced to, but because he chooses to. The final moments at the courthouse and Maris's grave are not just about legal closure or honoring the past. They symbolize a man reclaiming his humanity and two children finally receiving the security and love they had been denied for so long. The story doesn't pretend that trauma vanishes overnight, but it shows that with effort, honesty, and heart, broken people can build something beautiful. In the end, the children don't just gain a father, they gain safety, belonging, and a future. And Langston doesn't just gain a family, he gains a second chance. That, to me, is the most hopeful kind of miracle.